Welcome to KnotWork Storytelling. This is the show where we untangle our myths and reweave our stories, one age-old tale at a time. I'm your host and lead storyteller, Marisa Gowdy. I'm a myth worker, a story healer, a coach for writers and creative entrepreneurs, and the author of The Sovereignty Knot, A Woman's Way to Freedom, Power, Love, and Magic. If you love what you hear and want to support the show, I'd be so grateful if you'd become a paid subscriber on Substack. In my newsletter, Myth is Medicine, you'll receive bonus content related to the stories on the show and deep dives into how mythology and folklore can help heal the individual and the collective in the present moment and beyond. There's a link in the show notes to follow Myth is Medicine on Substack, or visit mythismedicine.substack.com. Before we get started, I wanted to let you know that the Writer's Knot, my long-standing writing community, opens its doors to new members on January 13th. This is a creativity incubator for writers from around the globe who are seeking camaraderie and connection. Often, I describe this as a space where the mythic imagination meets creative expression. I set the scene for all of our writing practice sessions with a set of carefully crafted writing prompts that prompt you to look at your world from a new angle. If the stories you've heard on KnotWork have inspired you in the last year, and if you're feeling called to tell your own stories, whether from your life, from your own ancestral tradition, from mythology, or from the wilds of your own imagination, this is the place to explore them. The warmth and the wisdom of the women in this Writer's Knot community that I founded 7 years ago continues to amaze and inspire me. And if you'd like to welcome more inspiration, more imbus, as they would say in the Irish Druidic tradition, then I would love to have you with us. Find more at marisagowdy.com. And now, onto the episode. Season 5, Episode 17, The 12 Rays of Solstice, or the Cailleach and Casual Conversation. I'm offering one final episode of the year because I've found that when you slow down to honor the dark time of the year, you sometimes find yourself wrapped in long, endless quiet. And sometimes an unexpected idea has a chance to find you. And then you find you just need to share it. So in this episode, we'll spend some time with the Cailleach and consider the solstice magic of Newgrange. I've been thinking a lot about ancestral traditions and what we really mean by that, and how far back we might want to reach to find a tradition that feels authentic. We'll spend a little time with the mystic philosopher John Moriarty to explore that all a bit further. And I want to offer you a window into a new practice that I'm trying this solstice season. You might want to try it too. Before we dive in, one quick note on a couple of the opportunities I'm creating for writers in 2025. At the top of the show, you heard me mention the Writer's Knot. That's my long-standing global community that's going to open its doors January 15th. This is a place to meet with other creatives and to meet with yourself on the page. And then there's a totally new program that I'll be offering in February, and it's called the Author's Knot. This group is an intimate 10-month online writing program for thought leaders, memoirists, and heart-led visionaries who are working on a book or some other kind of big project. The Author's Knot will help you strengthen your voice, clarify your message, and truly organize your ideas so you can bring the fullness of your vision to life. When I first conceived and launched KnotWork Storytelling, I was meeting regularly with a small group of creative entrepreneurs. And I know that this sort of close-knit community, guided by common purpose, can really mean everything when it comes to making a dream a reality. And so I'm crafting the Author's Knot program for folks who are declaring that 2025 is the year the book gets written. And by the way, the Author's Knot is not just for book writers. After putting out my own book in 2020, it became more clear to me than ever that there is deep magic in investing our energy and vision into the tried and true technology that is the book. And it's not the only way. Not if you're trying to communicate multi-layered, soul-deep, innovative ideas and stories. That's how the KnotWork Storytelling project was born. So applications for the Author's Knot are open now. And I'm already amazed by the level of interest from folks who are ready to really dive in deep and commit to getting their best work out into the world in the new year. If this sounds like you, I invite you to come and apply. Find all the details at marisagowdy.com. So let's move over to a story. It's something that happened at my house this past Friday morning. It was a frigid one, and my 10-year-old is one of those too cool for coats kids. I bet you know the type. In trying to beg them to put their coat on, I mentioned the Cailleach in some offhanded way. And Mairead looked at me quizzically. And I reminded them, honey, it was just 2 months ago, you and I, at Loch Crew, Slieve na Callie. Remember the hag's chair? Do you remember how windy and freezing cold it was? That's what I mean when I mention the Cailleach. It's like Cailleach wind out there. Please put on your coat. And Mairead just kind of looked at me and did kind of halfway put on the coat. I don't think it fully covered their shoulders. And said, Mom, do you truly believe that stuff? Now, I had to bundle Mairead out the door and get the dog out as well, and I think the conversation was kind of laid to rest. But this idea, this question, Mom, do you truly believe that stuff? Really started to sink in and work on me. Because as I walked out into the New York morning here in the Hudson Valley, where it was cold and blustery and every bit a Cailleach day, I really thought about the way in which believe is never the right word for it. Unless you mean believe in the way that it's synonymous for know it in my bones. Because when you're out in a Cailleach gale, you know it in your bones. You know that that sacred holy hag is real. And, I've come through periods throughout my life of doubting and wondering about these stories, about these goddesses, about whether or not these goddesses are, quote unquote, just stories, or what it means when we talk about divine feminine forces who walk the land and shape the land. Because I realize, even though I walk a distant land 3,000 miles away from Ireland, I walk with them somehow, with their stories. Their stories shape my spirit. And they shape what I create in this world. The Cailleach, she's in the bones of me. And she always has been. That's part of the ancestral lineage that I'm so aware of. But she's particularly there, and I'm particularly aware after the impromptu trip to Ireland that Mairead and I took this past October. Now, I've written about this trip a few times in my Myth is Medicine newsletter. Okay, here's a quick moment of shameless self-promotion. Please consider subscribing to my newsletter over on Substack at the paid level, because that's what supports this ad-free podcast. It has throughout 2024, and I hope that it will throughout 2025. So visit me over there if you can. And you'll read a few stories about this journey that we took that was 6 years and 2 weeks in the making. And I say that because I hadn't actually been back since 2018. And I certainly didn't expect there to be such a long gap between my being there and my returning. But I had taken my older daughter there when she was 8 in 2018. And Mairead was fully expecting their own 8-year-old trip. But then there was that whole global pandemic and other bits of life got in the way. So it had been 6 years and I just knew it was time. And so I booked a flight, and 2 weeks later, Mairead and I were there, flying out of JFK and landing in Dublin. Now on this trip, we visited so many sacred places. Arran, the biggest of the Aran Islands of Inishmore, Knocknarea, where we've spent time with Maeve, looking over the gorgeous harbor at Sligo. We went to the Keshcoran Caves, which is a place that I had dreamed about before I even realized that they were real. 17 caves all carved into a hillside. It's a place of my greatest imagining. Then we went to the museums in Dublin, saw the bog bodies and all the gold. We walked past my old apartment in Christchurch, and we visited so many bookstores along the way. And we saw old friends, folks I've known for 25 years. and new ones, people I've gotten to know just through this podcast. I was even walking across Galway on our very first morning, going to meet a friend, Rory, who I've known since 1999. And I heard my name being called across the street, but it was a woman's voice. And there was Anna Lou, who I hadn't seen since I was 20 years old. She picked me off the street. I tell you this story because I'm just so overcome by the sense that we really can have a home that's so far from the place where we were born and raised. Because when I walk through Galway, it feels more like home to me than Cape Cod, where I grew up, or Boston, where I went to college, or even New Paltz here in the Hudson Valley, where I live now. And that's part of the magic of the place that we in the diaspora try to understand and struggle with, that feels so very real and also slightly ridiculous, as if we might be making something up purely from our own yearning. There's one other place that we visited, Slieve na Cailleach, that I mentioned at the beginning. It was the very last day we were there. And it was the very first named storm of the year. Storm Ashley was blowing through with wind gusts 50 and 70 miles per hour. And we decided, along with Jen Murphy, who's been on the podcast several times, and my friend Dee Kavanagh, who I hope you'll meet in the new year with me. They both know this place well. They are both women who know sacred spaces in their bones and who would venture out to them no matter what the weather. We all went out there together. We all went up the hill at Loch Crew, bent over by the wind, nearly blown off our feet, and sometimes actually all the way down to the ground. As Jen describes it, there we were, blown to bits by the Cailleach. And I'm still feeling the wind of her in my bones. And I'm still picking up the bits, because what my constant prayer was up there was, Cailleach, oh Cailleach, let your winds of change blow through me. I wanted to allow myself to be dissolved, not to lose myself entirely, but perhaps something akin to that idea of an ego death that you hear the Jungians talk about. That idea of saying, I will let go of the stories, of the pretensions, of the preoccupations, of the old beliefs, the dogmas that are holding me back. Blow through me. Let me be reborn from the very element of air. And slowly, as I come back to this life here in New York, I find ways in which that's happening all the time. And these stories will surely continue to be unspooled here on the podcast in 2025, but also over at Myth is Medicine. Again, I invite you to subscribe and read me there as well. But one place that Mairead and I did not get to visit was Newgrange. It was fully booked, and I was also in two minds about going to a space that's so curated and regulated by the Office of Public Works. The wilds of places had been calling us all week, and it felt right to stay with that sort of energy. And I'm mentioning Newgrange now because here we are in December at the solstice moment, the moment that this 5,000-year-old marvel, Newgrange, was built for. Now at this point, with all of our digital assets and live stream videos, I'm almost certain you've heard of it. It's a royal tomb there in the middle of the Boyne Valley, the Brú na Bóinne. It wasn't until 1960s that the archaeologists realized that it was made to mark the solstice. Before, they thought it was just a place of burial. Because in the 3 mornings or so that surround the longest night of the year, here at the end of December, a ray of light pierces the inner chamber, passing through a more than 60-foot-long passageway to illuminate the sacred carvings inside. Now, of course, there would have been much more in there. There are a few scant remains that have been discovered. But what truly went on in that space? What was illuminated by that light? What was the real truth of that sacred inner chamber for the pre-Celtic people of 5 millennia ago? We couldn't possibly know right? As the Irish mystic philosopher John Moriarty says in his book Invoking Ireland, by what name did its builders know Newgrange? By what names did they know the sun, the moon, the Boyne itself? What was their word for death? In every word and work of it, was their language as hospitable to reality as Newgrange itself is hospitable to the winter solstice sun? Was their language so open to reality that it could travel down into the roots of its seeing and knowing, illuminating its seeing, illuminating its knowing? We do not know. And what even is this reality that Moriarty talks about? His work is dense and phenomenal. I come back and I read it with fresh eyes every time. I find myself rereading it as much as I ever make my way through new pages. It's full of sacred paradox and contradiction. There's a sense in Moriarty's work that there is a knowable reality, but we only find it by admitting all that we cannot know and losing ourselves and finding ourselves in the mystery. Now, I'm weaving here. I'm taking liberties as I open with the Cailleach and then ask you to come to Newgrange with me. But I also feel like I'm speaking of some primal but ultimately unknowable truth that we still know in our bones when I weave these ideas together. Because generally speaking, the Cailleach is not mythologically associated with Newgrange, with the seat of the winter solstice. But I think we feel her presence there somehow. Samhain, the start of the Celtic winter, which comes at the end of October and at the beginning of November, is certainly her season. So many soul sisters and I speak about what it means to be in the belly of Cailleach times. We know it's a moment to really sit with what is and with what isn't, with what's been lost in any given year, with the hollowness we might feel and the yearnings we might have. In this time, it stretches all throughout the dark seasons of the year, all the way to Imbolc, to Bridget's Day, to that time when spring returns to Ireland. So no, the Cailleach, she's not really associated with Newgrange. Instead, we think of her when we think of the Beara Peninsula, where she was transformed into stone while awaiting for the return of her lover, Manannán mac Lir, the god of the sea. And then there are the stories of the Cailleach I'm just discovering, like how she was connected with those Kesh caves, the caves of Kesh Corran, where it said that she was a young maiden, and that's where she first fell in love with Manannán. But then she was transformed into the Cailleach. She was bewitched, they say, with nut fruit charms to the semblance of themselves by the 3 hideous hags of Kesh Corran. That's a story I'm excited to explore and tell in 2025. Now, Newgrange, it's associated with the goddess Bowen, and you've likely met her in our most popular KnotWork Storytelling episode ever, when Laura Murphy came in season 2, episode 7, and shared with us a story that she calls Bowen Remembered. I invite you here at solstice time to revisit that one. But I also invite you to sit with me and the Cailleach here and consider that there's some intuitive knowing deep in our belly, in our collective imaginal belly, that says that the Cailleach and the darkest night have a history together, and that they would have come together somehow at Newgrange, where the ancients built that passage tomb that somehow captured the rays of light for a few scant minutes to let them know that even in the darkest times, the light would return. The light was there. The light was theirs. Now, in the Book of the Cailleach, Gearóid Ó Crúlaí does briefly tie in the sacred hag with Newgrange because he calls it a telluric womb space. He's seeking and finding the entire body of the Cailleach, the wise woman healer, in various landscapes and megaliths of Ireland. And so he sees her in that created womb crafted of the earth. O'Crueley calls the Cailleach a female personification of peripheral wilderness. I love that phrase. And he also says that the Cailleach is connected to conflict with and displacement by Christianity. And for me, that's one more reason that on this particular Cailleach-kissed year, when I should have felt her hollow out my bones with that great Cailleach gale there at the top of Sliabh na Cailleach, that I should find myself drawn to a solstice-based practice to welcome in the new year. Now, I myself don't so much feel a conflict with Christianity as much as I feel a recognition of the wise child within me who understood the sense of displacement from the church. In my late teens, I walked out of Mass and started to find my way to the Mary Garden. I didn't pray the rosary, but I did love the way that there was a Mary statue all covered in moss with a snake at her feet, who I liked to imagine was her friend rather than her foe. And this was right about the age when I heard the call to Ireland. And I heard the call to a not at all profitable study of poetry and mythology, when the vast majority of my university classmates at a Jesuit institution were all talking about their job interviews with the big 5 consulting firms and all the accounting gigs they were going to land. Peripheral wilderness, conflict with and displacement by Christianity. Before I ever even knew I was spending time with the Cailleach, she was clearly whispering in my ears. And so, as I said, this feels like a Cailleach-kissed year for me. And so, I'm going to be trying out a practice that I'm calling the 12 Rays of Solstice. In the 12 days, stretching from December 21st to January 1st, I'm going to be seeking out a sign each day that foretells of the year to come. So that means December 21st corresponds to January, December 22nd to February, all the way up to January 1st, which offers a bit of what December might look like. It's about looking for signs in nature. It's about looking to the oracle cards. It's about perhaps the song that keeps getting stuck in your head, or it's about a conversation you have that suddenly seems to change everything. It's the subtle and the profound and the way those two weave together. Now, this particular search for signs and portents is inspired by the Omen Days practice that Laura Murphy introduced me to a couple of years ago. She'd learned it from Cailleach Matthews. And Cailleach is the creator of many, many books, and also the Celtic Wisdom Tarot, which I have been using ever since I discovered it in a bookshop in 1999. So when Laura introduced this practice that Cailleach had discovered from, I think, a medieval period or earlier, I was really excited and felt a sense of homecoming because Cailleach had guided my own process from afar with her creative work for so long. I certainly felt a familiarity deep in my bones. Now, there's real magic in this Omen Days practice. I've used it before. But somehow, this year in particular, this way of starting on December 25th and reaching through to the Epiphany for this practice doesn't quite work for me. Accounting for time and faith based purely on the Gregorian calendar and on Christian tradition just doesn't feel authentic to me. Telling time based on calculations made according to events that took place in first century Palestine and in medieval Rome, well, though we've all agreed to tell time this way, I can't ever quite get over the fact that it's not real. Not in the way that telling time according to the movement of the earth herself is real. What was it that Moriarty said about that idea of reality? He said he was wondering whether their language, the language of those pre-Celtic builders of Newgrange, whether their language was so open to reality that it could travel down into the roots of its seeing and knowing, illuminating its seeing, illuminating its knowing. There's something for me there in that idea that rooting time into what we know is the tilting of the earth and the placement of the sun in our sky is much more real than the agreed upon calendars. So I am called to use this time to collect rays of illumination. In these 12 days of solstice, I'll be seeking out light in the darkness, those obscure and hidden truths that want to emerge. Because, we live in a culture that's addicted to the light, whether it's the limelight or whether it's the light of the screen or whether it's that keeping it light, good vibes only sort of BS. That's not what I'm talking about when I want us to consider what it might be like to collect rays of illumination at the darkest time of year. Because the fact is that we can only understand the shadows in relationship to the light source. I was reading another bit of John Moriarty the last night, and he speaks of old gods. And specifically, in one section, he was talking about Dionysus, who he describes as God in and of nature, unrestrained and uncontaminated by moral demand. Moriarty speaks of gods who embody is rather than ought. Think about that. What's it like to be concerned with gods who are concerned with how things are rather than how things should be? Again, I can see myself walking out of the church with its creed that did not speak to me, with its commandments and its collection of oughts, and instead walking out to a garden to sit by a moss-covered Mary, to see who she was, to see who I was in her presence. Embodying is rather than ought. What might come through when we're looking for that over 12 days? I'm eager for a 2025 that is informed by all the magical, difficult, unknown isness of the world. And that's what's calling me to try out what I'm calling for myself, this 12 Rays of Solstice practice. And maybe that title's a little too clever, and it might suffice to simply call it the 12 Days of Solstice. But can't you see it? Even if you haven't been to Newgrange yourself, I bet you've seen the pictures. The way that ray of light pierces the darkness of the passage, all the way to the burial chamber. The way that place is a tomb, but also a womb, and where it had to have somehow been true that they were thinking about rebirth, not just death, with that immensely difficult practice of creating, of building a structure so large. It couldn't have been finished in a single lifetime. That ray of light that penetrates Newgrange, it reveals what is concealed. It heralds the rebirth of the year, the return of the sun, the inevitable shift out of the deepest darkness into the gathering light. The metaphor of it all is almost too perfect. It's so simple and profound at the same moment. I think we risk either skipping over it or getting lost in it completely. But what if this year on solstice, you gave yourself a chance to think about it? One more last thought from Moriarty. It was all on the same incandescent page of Invoking Ireland. He asked, can there be a religion that doesn't falsify nature? That's the question, I think. And that's the question I didn't know I was asking when I stepped out of Mass and into that garden. So this year, with this 12 Rays of Solstice project, I feel as if I'm once again walking out of the building with its oughts and expectations. And I invite you to sit with me. Can there be a religion that doesn't falsify nature? Can there be modern practices and systems and structures and governments that don't take nature and try to use her as a commodity? That's one of the illuminations I'll be looking for on these 12 days of solstice as I collect these insights, these auguries, these signs and symbols, these sacred omens of what might be possible in 2025. So I'm going to be exploring this practice both on Substack and on Instagram. You'll find the links to both of those accounts in the show notes. Perhaps you want to explore this with me. I'd love to hear about what illuminations come through for you starting on December 21st. And I look forward to exploring all that might be possible in what is bound to be a deeply difficult and deeply change-ridden year. We rely on our words, on creativity, on connection. I rely on writing and storytelling and story listening and story collecting. And I hope that you'll travel with me, that we can find our way through the darkness together and collect the light in all that's possible. Thank you for your support on the podcast this year. It's hard to believe we're wrapping up the 3rd year of KnotWork Storytelling. We'll return with brand new episodes right at the end of January, just in time for Bridget's Day. I'm excited to announce that I'll be renaming the podcast, just subtly. KnotWork Myth and Storytelling seems like it gets us even closer to what's really happening here on the show. Starting at the end of January, as I said, we'll be coming to you with a whole new season of stories and conversations, both mythic tales as well as deep dives with different people who are coming with me to talk about this idea of being myth workers and culture makers, because I believe that's what's called on. Our most creative, innovative, eyes wide open, willing to plumb the depths of the darkness selves. I hope to travel with you. I invite you to come and write with me if that is part of your path in the new year. May the Cailleach's wisdom blow through the very bones of you. May the rays of illumination that come and begin at the solstice pierce right through you. And may Bridget welcome you with open arms on the other side. Banachty. Gora Mila Maiget. Thank you for everything. I send you deepest blessings. Thank you for tuning in to the KnotWork Storytelling Podcast. Please subscribe and review the show on your favorite podcast platform. And do share this episode with other lovers of myth and story. By the way, everyone is a lover of myth and story, even if they've forgotten. Creating this show is a labor of love, and your support will help me continue to craft and share stories through this season and beyond. Please consider becoming a subscriber to my paid newsletter, Myth is Medicine. You'll find it on Substack, and that's where all my newest writing and occasional bonus podcasts can be found. You can learn more about my writing, my book, our online creative community, The Writer's Knot, as well as how to work with me as a writing coach over at marisagowdy.com. Gratefully, I live, write, work, and record this podcast on the ancestral lands of the Munsee Lenape tribe, whose name means original people.